Today, Janice and I are going to share with you a fundamental principle of the Freedom Way Equine Assisted Coach Training Programs, and that is meeting clients where they are. This approach really emphasizes the importance of letting go of preconceived agendas and honoring the unique needs and experience of the client where they are that day in that moment. One of the very first things we talk about with our coaches when we start moving into the coaching aspect is the importance of letting go of agendas. It's natural for both the coach and the client to come into a session with goals and objectives that they want to meet. After all, that's why the client is coming. But rigidly sticking to those things and to a predetermined plan can really hinder and alter a session. A lot of times what happens when a client shows up is they do have an idea of what they want to experience, something they're working on, something they want to work through, something they want to gain. A lot of times what we find is that there's something else that's in the way of that. It's not just simply waving the wand and say, okay, boom, now all of a sudden you have confidence. It's those little things about the confidence, and to understand that, that's where that trilogy of connection and the horse communication piece comes in, because the horse doesn't know the intentions or the outcomes. It has no idea what the agenda is. The horse knows who you are in the moment. And that is all the information the horse needs to begin to respond and interact with both the client and the coach. And so when we can follow the horse's lead sometimes, it'll take us down the pathway to that key element that the client needs to work through in order to gain the outcome they desire. You know, sometimes when you think about, I really want to work on more confidence, or I'm healing from a trauma. Those are the big intentions, and we get so focused on that personally for us individually, we often don't see the other little things that are kind of hanging us up along the way. But the horse does. And that is why it is so fundamental in our coach training program to be aware of the intents and the outcomes, but also at the same time to train our coaches to let those go. And what I say is to follow the breadcrumbs. You will get to that bigger outcome, but you'll do so in a way that meets the client where they are in that moment. Janice shared the story a couple videos ago about the gal who was grieving. And if Janice had come in with this, well, let's just be happy, that would not have served the client. That's ultimately what the client wanted to experience, but she couldn't start there. That is why letting go of agendas is such an important part of our principles and our teachings.
I often think of trauma in this way. Somebody will come to, work through getting in a car accident or something, right? But what happens in the middle of the session is the horse somehow feels a little child that was hurt. So the trauma from their car accident isn't really what's going on. The trauma from their 5-year-old self is what's happening. Mm-hmm. And that ends up coming up in the session, right? And by the time that's come up and surface, the trauma from the car accident is gone. Right. It had nothing to do with that. And this happens often when we just allow, like Anna said, to drop those agendas and expectations. Mm-hmm. I've worked with somebody, there's some different methods that have agendas. They really do. And I've worked with somebody, and one of those that have come into the session with me, it was a joint effort, and then say, so what are we doing today? Working on leadership or herd behavior? And I'm kind of, wait a minute, the horse is going to decide what we're doing today. And, I got the deer in the headlights look like, what? This is how I do it. We work on this on day one. Damn it, I don't teach them. Mm-hmm. That's and this is how we feel. Is to us, that's kind of using the horse as a tool. when you walk in there with that preconceived, and, we're not knocking any way anybody else does anything, for sure. This is just what feels right for us, putting that horse back in the driver's seat and letting them do their job.
Mhm.
Because horses do love to take that on as a job.
Yeah.
They love the interactions with people. They love to support them. That's what they do. They do it very well.
They do. And one of the ways that we help our students achieve this is we do spend a lot of time in our program talking about intuition, about reading and feeling energy, and about the empathic abilities that Janice and I believe we all have. These are skills that tune into the client's emotional state, their energy level, and the unspoken needs of that particular client on that day. When we can let go of any ideas, preconceived notions, or agendas, then we can be in that spot directly with the client, not following a pattern or a recipe, if you will. The client is best served by meeting them where they are at that day. If a client comes to you for grief, you're probably not going to jump to happy in the example we gave you. If a client comes to work on some fear, it's a big leap to move to confidence in the snap of a finger. There's you follow the breadcrumbs the client lays out and the horse lays out to get to that end result that the client wants. So when we talk about meeting the client where they are, it encompasses a lot of different things. And I just shared a few of those with you: the intuition, energy, and empathic abilities. We've talked about equine communication. We've talked about the trilogy of connection. We've talked about a lot of those different things. And those all come into full play here, where in some cases, initially, a lot of our students feel like they're flying without a net, right? Our mind wants that logical process that we go through because we all want the best for our client. So we reverse engineer that, I guess, if you will, and teach our clients to become very comfortable in that space of moving into the unknown and the unscripted.
Well, and they learn to be able to discern if the client's regulated too.
Mhm.
They've learned to be able to tell if they're regulated.
And we're talking about the nervous system.
Yeah, because that's important when you're working with horses, is the
Mhm.
client's nervous system.
Yeah.
And, that's not a term that a lot of people know,
Mhm.
that they need to be able to regulate their system, and the horses help the clients do that automatically. But that's part of that, meeting the clients where they are. How is
Yeah.
this client? We're not trying to have a client show up a certain way for the session, right? So when the client shows up, if they are not have an unregulated nervous system, then our students know how to help them become that way.
Mhm.
And they're not trying to change it, but they're teaching them the tools to be able to be in this space.
Yeah.
So it's really being able to discern, where's my client at now? Because that's where I need to be. I don't need to try to shift my client into something before we enter the session.
Right. It's really about meeting the client where they are when they show up. All of our clients come to us with a variety of different experiences and challenges and strengths. And so it's essential to honor and respect those differences, to recognize them within the client, and recognize that a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. Meeting a person where they are lets them feel seen, lets them feel heard, and begins to create that trust that we've talked about, and begins to create that space of safety. I'm reminded of a beautiful session I had with a client who was in stage 4 cancer. And she didn't have long to go, and she wanted to come for a session with the horses just to work through some final things and to really make peace with this next stage of her journey. And this was a case where, as I was preparing for the client, I just let go of all things. I knew what she wanted to work on, but I had no idea how it was going to transpire. And when she got there, we walked out with the horses, and there were 3 horses in the pen. And it was really interesting. The least likely horse that I thought would show up walked right up to her. This horse generally didn't interact a whole lot. She kind of had her own quirky little personality, and just wasn't warm fuzzy. But it was really interesting that she was the horse that before the other two, who usually are really eager, not sometimes almost fight to see who's going to get to work with the client first. She walked up just confident and was like, I'm working with this client today, and that end of story. And it was really beautiful to see her soften, but still her strength as she was by this client's side the entire session. There was even a moment in this session where she had wrapped her head around the client. The client was very emotional in that particular moment, and she had tears flowing. She just wrapped her head around her neck around her, and just held her. And she stood there. I don't know, I wasn't watching minutes. I was in awe, actually, watching this happen. They were there for a while. So unusual for the horse. And it was exactly what the client needed. The client didn't need the human communication. She didn't need someone telling her what she needed to do to become peaceful with her death. That was the last thing she did. She'd actually had, I learned after the session, she had her fill of that. People trying to be helpful, but it wasn't allowing the client to be who she was. And when she walked in and that horse walked up right up to her, she says, from that moment forward, she says, I knew she got me. I knew she didn't need anything from me. A lot of times during that death transition, the living need something from the dying. She said she didn't need anything. She stood right directly with me. And we talked, and when the deep emotions came up, she just held me. And I didn't have to do it. A beautiful example of meeting the client where they're at without agenda.
Could you imagine if somebody would have tried to come in and you can't imagine.
No, and
you just you can't.
I learned a lot in that session because that was one of the first things, as a coach, what questions can I ask? How can I help support her? But she didn't want that, and recognizing what was happening between that connection, the communication between the two of them, I clearly knew I had a role within the session, but it wasn't an active one. It was a role of support.
And that's sometimes that's the big difference right there is sometimes we just need to be there to create the space.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to be in the pen. We don't need to be asking questions. We just need to be there to hold the space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the big differences about the freedom is teaching people to let go of everything else.
Right.
Just be there. Just show up. Let whatever happens.
And what I love about this, and we're going to go back, I'm going to go back to our students, is as during the live retreat, we have them begin coaching clients. And so naturally some anxiety, some fear, some unknown, there's a lot, they want to get it right. They want, there's a lot going on in that space. And it is one of the most beautiful things. It's one of my highlights is when it finally all sinks in that all this preparation is good, but they leave it outside the arena and they step in and just allow the session to unfold. And the big smiles on their faces and the confidence, they're walking into the arena, they're there, a little bit unknown, you know, but excited about the whole thing. And just to see them walk out of that session going, that was freaking amazing, right? And I didn't know what I was going to do. And it worked.
And we've had him step out. I didn't do anything, but the client said it was amazing.
Yeah. And I love that. They're like, it worked. And, you know, they finally believe, you know, it's one of those things you have to experience to believe. But definitely a big cornerstone of our program is letting go of those agendas. The knowledge, the information, everything we've talked about is important. But when the client shows up, it's just about meeting the client heart to heart, soul to soul in the space that they're in.
It's funny. We teach all these weeks of knowledge and then we say, no, let go of everything.
Now there's a deer in the headlight moment.
Our brains need the knowledge. Our brains think we have to have a plan, right?
Yeah.
So we teach a plan sometimes. And then we're like, oh.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful when it happens.